What I am about to reveal to you tonight will shock many pastors, many Christian leaders, and many believers who think all prayers are equal, because I am going to tell you something that sorcerers know but Christians don't. Not all prayers are equal. Some prayers, when uttered by a Christian, have absolutely no effect on us in the spiritual realm. We see them rise and we watch them with indifference. They are weak, lukewarm, powerless, like plastic bullets fired at an armored vehicle. But there are 4 types of prayer that terrified us, 4 types of prayer that, when used by a Christian, caused panic in our ranks, 4 types of prayers before which even the most powerful, most experienced, most ancient sorcerers could do nothing but flee. And for 16 years, I fought these 4 types of prayer. I tried to neutralize them, I tried to find countermeasures, and I failed every time. My name is Diabete, I'm 44 years old, and for 16 years, I was what's called a spiritual hunter in Ivory Coast, not an ordinary sorcerer who launches attacks against defenseless people, but a hunter, a mercenary of the invisible world. My job was to fight other sorcerers when a client wanted protection against a rival, and especially to fight Christians who were praying, Christians whose prayers threatened my client's operations, Christians whose spiritual protection was too strong for ordinary sorcerers to penetrate. I was the one they called when no one else could break through the defenses of someone who was praying. In this video, I'm going to reveal the 4 types of prayers that terrified me the most. Not from the perspective of a pastor who teaches prayer, but from the perspective of the sorcerer who fought them and was defeated by them, because when you know what frightens your enemy, you know which weapon to use. But before I reveal them to you, you need to understand why I became a spiritual hunter, because my story explains why I knew prayers better than most Christians who use them. If you want to understand what truly terrifies the world of darkness, hit the like button now so that every Christian who has been praying without results for years finally understands why and stays until the end, because the 4th prayer is what brought me to my knees and made me beg God for forgiveness. I grew up in Bouake, the 2nd largest city in Ivory Coast, in the Cocoa neighborhood. My father was a mechanic, my mother sold spices at the main market. We were Muslim, like many families in northern Ivory Coast. An honest life, but a life marked by an event that changed everything. When I was 26, I was in love with a woman, Mariama. We were to be married. The date was set, the families had given their consent, the dowry had been negotiated, and 3 weeks before the wedding, Mariama married another man, a richer man, a more influential man, a man whose father was a traditional chief in the region, and Mariama's father, who had given me his word, went back on it without shame in front of the entire community because money and status spoke louder than his word. The humiliation was public and complete. Everyone in Bouake knew. In a town like Bouake, news travels faster than the wind. On the very day of Mariama's wedding to the other man, my neighbors looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. My childhood friends avoided my gaze in the street. The women in the neighborhood whispered as I passed, and my mother, that strong woman who proudly sold her spices at the main market, wept alone in her room at night because her son had been humiliated in front of the entire community. My father said nothing. He repaired his engines in the garage as usual, but I saw his jaw tighten when the neighbors commented on the marriage. He carried my humiliation on his silent shoulders like an invisible weight that bent him a little more each day, and I felt only 2 things in my body and mind, pain and rage. A deep pain, like a blade plunged into my chest, slowly turning day and night, and a rage so burning, so devouring, so total that I could no longer sleep. I lay awake in bed every night, staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios of revenge. I couldn't eat, food had lost its taste, I couldn't work, my hands trembled when I tried to do anything, I couldn't think of anything but revenge, not with my fists, because the man who had taken Mariama was protected by his chiefly family, not with a knife, because I would have ended up in prison, with something more powerful, something invisible, something that would destroy this man, this family, and Mariama's father from the inside out, without anyone ever being able to prove it was me. It was this blind, devouring rage that led me one Tuesday evening to the home of an old spiritual hunter in a village called Sarkazu, a 2-hour drive from Bwiki, and from Yamukro, a man the villagers called the Wall because, in the spirit world, nothing and no one could pass through him. He was feared by sorcerers throughout the central region of Ivory Coast. Even the most powerful marabouts of Boak refused to confront him. The Wall lived in a modest house at the end of a red dirt road. When I entered his courtyard, he was sitting on a wooden stool, bare-chested, with ritual scarifications on his chest and arms. His eyes were closed, but when I crossed the threshold of his courtyard, he opened his eyes and looked at me with an intensity that stopped me in my tracks, and he said, before I even opened my mouth to introduce myself, "You come seeking revenge, Mariama, the stolen marriage. I see it in your eyes. Rage is like a red light around you in the invisible world, and I can help you. But the price isn't money. Money doesn't interest me. The price is your life. You give me 16 years of service, 16 years of your life in service to the invisible world, and I make you a hunter, the most feared hunter in Ivory Coast." The number hit me like a punch. 16 years of my life given to an old man in a remote village. But rage doesn't think. Rage doesn't read contracts. Rage doesn't weigh the pros and cons. Rage signs in the dark without asking questions. And that night, in the dusty courtyard of Sarkis, sitting before a man who had read my life in my eyes in a second, I said yes, and that yes sealed the 16 darkest years of my existence. My master, the Wall, trained me for a year and a half in his village, a 2-hour drive from Bwik, a year and a half of sleepless nights, a year and a half of training in spiritual combat, a year and a half learning to leave my body, to move in the invisible realm, to identify people's spiritual defenses, and above all, to break them. The Wall was an extraordinary man in the world of darkness. He was 15 when I met him, and he had been fighting since the age of 15, with 15 years of experience in spiritual warfare. He had faced hundreds of opposing sorcerers. He had broken the defenses of pastors considered fortresses by their churches. He had survived attacks that would have killed any ordinary sorcerer, and the reason no one could cross him in the spiritual world, the reason for his nickname, the Wall, was that he knew the prayers of Christians better than the Christians themselves. The enemy, he repeated to me every night during my training, know his weapons, know his weaknesses, and above all, know the difference between a loaded weapon and an empty one. Because most Christians carry empty weapons, they pray, but their prayers are powerless. They cry out, but their cries don't penetrate the ceiling of their room into the spiritual realm. And these deafened Christians aren't threats, they're easy targets. But there are a small number of Christians, a tiny percentage, who carry loaded weapons, prayers that burn like fire in the unseen world, prayers that cut like swords through our defenses, prayers that explode like bombs in the midst of our operations. And these deafened Christians are your true enemies. Learn to recognize them, learn to avoid them when you can, and learn to fight them when you have no choice. It's this building of the Wall that allows me to speak to you today with an authority that most pastors lack, not because I'm more spiritual than they are, but because I've seen prayers from the other side. I've seen which ones work and which ones don't. I fought both types for 16 years, and I can tell you with the certainty of a man who has been on the invisible battlefield that the problem for Christians isn't the absence of prayer. The problem is the type of prayer, and it was in this work as a hunter, a mercenary of the invisible world, that I identified the 4 types of prayers that truly terrified the darkness, not theoretical prayers I read in a book, but real prayers that I fought with my own spiritual hands and that defeated me again and again for 16 years. Now, let me reveal to you the first of these 4 prayers. And when you hear it, you'll understand why most of your prayers do nothing in the world of darkness. The first prayer that terrified witches and wizards was the prayer of naming. The prayer of nomination is when a Christian doesn't pray in a general and vague way, but in a specific and focused way. It's the difference between firing a rifle with your eyes closed and firing a rifle with a laser sight pointed precisely at the target. When a Christian simply says, "Lord, protect me," this prayer rises into the spiritual world like a mist. You see it, you feel it, but it doesn't touch anything specific. It disperses in all directions, it covers a wide area, but with such diluted power that it can't break anything solid. It's like pour a glass of water onto a large fire. The water exists, the gesture is real, but the impact is nil. But when a Christian says, "Lord, I break the attack targeting my finances through my co-worker Jean-Pierre," that prayer is a guided missile. It ascends into the spiritual realm with a precise direction, an identified target, and power concentrated on a single point, and it strikes exactly where it's aimed with the precision of a surgeon cutting to the millimeter. The difference is so dramatic that during my early years as a hunter, I didn't understand why some Christians made me run away and others made me laugh, until the wall explained it to me. It told me, listen to their word. When a Christian prays with general words, you have nothing to fear, but when a Christian starts naming specific things, when they start identifying directions, people, types of attacks, prepare to run, because the one who names is the one who sees, and the one who sees in the spiritual realm is dangerous to us. In the spiritual realm, when a Christian names an attack specifically in their prayer has an immediate and dramatic effect. The named attack begins to vibrate, to tremble like a structure struck by an earthquake, and if the Christian continues to name the attack precisely and authoritatively, the structure collapses, not gradually, all at once, like a building demolished by an explosive charge placed in exactly the right spot. The problem for the sorcerer is that most Christians don't name the attack. They pray in general terms: Lord, bless me; Lord, protect my family; Lord, keep evil away. These general prayers are like shots fired into the fog. You make noise, you expend ammunition, but you don't hit anything specific, and the sorcerer, hidden behind his attack structures, watches his prayers pass over his head without touching him and smiles. But when a Christian names the attack, everything changes. When he says, "I break the spirit of financial blockage sent by my business partner," the sorcerer no longer smiles, because that prayer has just located his attack with GPS precision in the spiritual realm, and a localized attack is a vulnerable attack. I fought hundreds of Christians who prayed for 16 years in every city and neighborhood of Ivory Coast, from Bogue to Abidjan, from San Pedro to Corogo, from Yamro to Man, and I can tell you the exact ratio because I learned to calculate it during my training with the wall. Out of 100 Christians who pray regularly, only about 5 specifically name their attacks in their prayer. 5 out of 100, 5%. The other 4 use general words, formulas learned by heart, phrases repeated without precise targeting. Their prayers, however sincere and fervent, do not touch us in the spiritual realm. They pass us by, they fly over us, they scatter before reaching anything. It was these 5% who gave us true nightmares in the darkness. These 5 Christians out of 100 who had instinctively understood, or through teaching, that prayer is a precision weapon and not a blind cry into the void. There was a woman in Abidjan, in the Yopougon district, an intercessor in a revival church. A client had hired me to break the prayer blanket she placed over her family because this blanket prevented the client's attacks from reaching the woman's husband, who was his business rival. I attacked this woman for 3 consecutive nights with the most advanced techniques the wall had taught me: targeted attacks, flanking attacks, surprise attacks, and every night, without fail, when I positioned myself in the spirit world to strike, this woman would awaken not physically, but spiritually. Something within her would rouse her at the precise moment of my attack, like a spiritual alarm system detecting my presence, and she would begin to pray, not a vague, general prayer like, "Lord, protect my family." No, she would say things with terrifying precision. "In the name of Jesus, I see the attack coming from the north against my husband's business." She would give the direction, I name it. She would identify the attack, locate it in the spirit world, target it specifically, and destroy it now. She would initiate the strike, and in the spirit world, I literally saw the effect of every word. When she said, "I see the attack," my invisibility vanished. I was suddenly visible, exposed like a burglar caught red-handed by a spotlight. When she said, "I name it," my carefully constructed and camouflaged attack also became visible. Its entire structure appeared in the spirit world like a building whose lights are switched on in the night, and when she said, "I destroy it," the whole attack exploded like a bomb into 1,000 pieces of light that scattered in all directions of the spirit world, and I, the hunter, was thrown back by the shockwave. 3 nights, 3 attacks built with 16 years of experience and the most powerful techniques of the wall, 3 total and humiliating destructions by a single woman praying in her room in Yop-Ugon, a woman who didn't hold a doctorate in theology, no training in spiritual warfare, no visible supernatural power, just the ability to accurately name what she was fighting. I called my client the next day and told him, "This woman is untouchable. She names every attack before I even have a chance to launch it. What I build at night, she locates and destroys before sunrise. Find another hunter because I can't do anything against this intercessor." And this intercessor from Yop-Ugon is just one case, one among dozens of Christians who have defeated me in 16 years, simply by naming their attacks with precision. When God freed me from this life of spiritual hunting, the first thing I understood was that for 16 years, I had been fighting the wrong enemy. I was fighting the prayers of Christians when these prayers were the instruments of God Himself. I was fighting divine weapons with corrupt human tools, and every defeat I suffered at the hands of a Christian who prayed correctly should have shown me the truth much sooner. But the hunter's pride blinds him, and my pride blinded me for 16 years. Understanding what kind of prayer is effective in the spiritual realm is essential, but knowing what kind of prayer to use isn't enough if the doors opened by previous attacks aren't closed. The attack has created breaches, damage, patterns of destruction that continue to operate even when the attack itself is broken by prayer. It's like winning a battle but not tending to the wounded. The battle is won, but the wounded soldiers still die if no one cares for them. It's like a fire. You can put out the fire, but the burned walls remain burned, the collapsed roof remains collapsed. The house needs to be rebuilt after the fire, and this rebuilding requires a process, steps, and time. After my own deliverance, I myself went through a 21-day process to close the breaches that 16 years of spiritual warfare had opened in my own life, because the hunter, too, is wounded by the battles he fights. Every night spent fighting the prayers of Christians had left scars in the spiritual realm, and I had to treat them one by one, and what I discovered is that the same prayers that terrified me as a witch are also the prayers that can restore lives destroyed by witchcraft. The prayers that break the attacks are the same ones that heal the damage caused by those attacks, whether it be destroyed finances, broken marriages, attacked health, or targeted children. People from Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Congo, Senegal, Mali, and Guinea write to me every week to tell me that the breaches have been closed, that the prayers have regained their power. The link is in the description. Okay, let's move on to the second prayer because this one will help you understand why the time you pray makes absolutely everything. Now, if you feel your prayers aren't working, if you've been praying for months or years without seeing any change, if you feel something is blocking your prayers in the spiritual realm, I invite you to participate in a powerful action right now. Write in the comments, "In the name of Jesus, I declare that my prayers terrify the darkness." Don't miss this step. Participating in a public declaration is powerful. When you name the mission and break it with other believers, you are waging spiritual warfare. And I can tell you from experience that when hundreds of believers participate and proclaim victory together, missions are broken. So participate now. Write in the name of Jesus, I declare that my prayers terrify the darkness. The second prayer that terrified witches and wizards was the midnight prayer, and it is probably the most strategically important of the 4. When I say midnight, I'm not speaking symbolically, I'm not talking about a spiritual metaphor, I'm speaking literally, concretely, physically about the prayer said between midnight and 3 o'clock a.m. These specific 3 hours of the night, not 11 o'clock p.m., not 6 o'clock a.m., but between midnight and 3 o'clock a.m., because this precise time window is the main battleground, the central theater of operations of the spirit world, and here's why this window is so critical. It is between midnight and 3 o'clock a.m., that witches and wizards are most active in the unseen world. It is during these hours that the most powerful attacks are launched against families. It is during these hours that the most complex and devastating rituals are performed by covens and hunters. It is during these hours that operations on children are carried out, as other former witches have revealed on this channel. It is during these hours that charged objects are activated remotely, and it is during these hours that points of agreement are exploited to launch attacks into the victims' homes, and it is also during these hours that almost no Christians pray. The vast majority of Christians sleep between midnight and 3 a.m., and this sleep is the best ally of the world of darkness, because while a Christian sleeps, their prayer blanket weakens. The protective dome that surrounded their home while they prayed at 8 p.m. gradually diminishes throughout the night, and at 3 a.m., this dome is at its lowest level. This is the window of opportunity that witches wait for every night. But there are exceptions, rare exceptions, and these exceptions were our worst nightmares in the darkness, Christians who understood the strategic importance of this time window and who decided to rise every night at midnight to pray, not occasionally, not once a month at a church-organized prayer vigil, every night, with the discipline of a soldier on guard duty. A Christian who rises at midnight to pray does something strategically devastating to the world of darkness. He prays at the exact moment when the witches' operations are being deployed. It's like a soldier attacking the enemy in the middle of an operation, not after the operation when the damage is already done. During the operation, when the witches are vulnerable because they are focused on their work and not on their defense. When a Christian prayed at midnight, I could see him in the spirit world. His prayer rose like a pillar of fire in the middle of the night, a pillar visible for miles in the invisible world. And this pillar interfered with all the operations taking place in his geographical area, not just operations targeting his own family, all operations, because midnight prayer doesn't just protect the one who prays, it disrupts the entire system of darkness within its perimeter. I remember a man in Cocody, a residential neighborhood of Abidjan, a former soldier who converted to Christianity after his retirement. This man had made it a habit to get up every night at exactly midnight and pray for 2 hours, from midnight to 2 o'clock a.m., every single night without exception, even on weekends, even on holidays, even when he was sick, even when he was traveling. He found a place to pray at midnight. This man became the terror of our entire network of sorcerers in the Cocody neighborhood, not a network of 2 or 3 people, but a network of about 15 sorcerers and witch hunters who have been operating in this wealthy residential area for years, and every night at precisely midnight, when our collective operations began, when the sorcerers deployed to their respective targets, the soldier's pillar of fire would rise above his house and disrupt absolutely everything within a radius I estimated to be about 500 meters in the spirit world. Attacks that fellow sorcerers had prepared for days and weeks were neutralized in minutes by the mere presence of this prayer in the invisible world. Operations that should have succeeded without a hitch mysteriously failed. Charged objects placed in houses in the neighborhood lost their charge overnight because the pillar of fire interfered with the spiritual frequencies, and we all knew why. The soldier from Cocody prayed every night at the same time, with the same intensity, without ever faltering. I was personally sent by the network to neutralize this man, to break his prayer routine, to find a weakness in his defenses, perhaps one evening when he was too tired, perhaps one night when he was sick, perhaps a moment of emotional weakness I could exploit, and for 4 months, I tried every night 4 months of solitary combat against one man and his midnight prayer, and I couldn't break through, not once, not a single breach, not a single night when he wasn't there. Standing in the spiritual realm, surrounded by his pillar of fire at midnight, exactly, the consistency of his prayer was his fortress, and I couldn't break down a fortress that rebuilt itself every night at the exact same time, with the same intensity, fire. The third prayer is the one that still gives me chills when I think about it because it's the only prayer against which no sorcerer, absolutely none, has a defense. The third prayer that terrified sorcerers is speaking in tongues. Pentecostal and charismatic Christians practice what they call speaking in tongues. For many Christians, it's a controversial phenomenon. Some believe in it, others don't. Some think it's real, others think it's just emotion. But I'm going to give you the perspective of a sorcerer who fought this prayer for 16 years, and my perspective is unambiguous. Speaking in tongues is the most terrifying weapon in the spiritual world, and I'm not saying that rhetorically or exaggerating. I say this with the cold, absolute conviction of a man who fought this weapon for 16 years and never, not once, found any effective defenses against it. Why is praying in tongues so terrifying to sorcerers? Let me explain it from the perspective of someone who fought it. When a Christian prays in French, English, Lingala, Voth, or any other human language, the sorcerer in the spirit world hears every word. He understands every sentence. He knows exactly what the Christian is asking of God. He knows which direction the prayer is taking. He knows what target is being aimed at, and he can position himself accordingly. He can dodge. He can strengthen his defenses on the threatened side. He can prepare a targeted counterattack. He can adjust his strategy in real time. But when the Christian speaks in tongues, when his mouth begins to utter sounds and words that don't correspond to any known human language, everything changes in an instant. The sorcerer loses the signal. He is suddenly deaf in the spirit world. The words he heard clearly a second earlier are replaced by a stream of incomprehensible sounds that don't correspond to any language in his repertoire, not French, not English, not Arabic, not any of the ancient ritual languages that witches use among themselves. Nothing. It's as if someone suddenly changed radio frequencies in the middle of an intercepted communication, and the witch is left listening to white noise, and the witch can't anticipate what will happen next. He can't know if this prayer in tongues is a direct attack against him, a prayer of protection for his family, an intercession for someone else, or a combination of all of these. He is blind, deaf, and vulnerable, and in the spirit world, a blind and deaf witch is a dead witch, and in the spirit world, prayer in tongues has a specific visual appearance that I will never forget as long as I live. When a Christian prays in a human language, their prayer rises like a flame, a visible, identifiable flame, with a shape and direction that the witch can read and interpret. But when the Christian speaks in tongues, the flame changes completely. It becomes a formless white fire that spreads in all directions simultaneously like an explosion, and this explosion of white fire affects everything within its radius: ongoing attacks, repeater systems, stationed agents, charged objects. Everything is struck simultaneously by this incomprehensible wave of white fire. I have seen Christians praying in tongues cause total and absolute panic among witches, experienced witches with decades of practice, men and women who had faced hundreds of spiritual battles without ever backing down, fled from the white fire of a single Christian praying in tongues in their room at 2 o'clock a.m. They fled like soldiers caught in an air raid whose point of impact they could neither predict nor protect themselves from. I have seen it with my own spiritual eyes dozens of times over 16 years, and each time, the scene was the same. The white fire would rise, the sorcerers would panic, and everyone would flee in utter chaos. There was a pastor in a densely populated, working-class neighborhood of Abidjan, a man in his 40s, short in stature, unassuming, who didn't at all fit the image one has of a powerful man of God. His church had about 200 members who gathered in a modest building on the side of the main road. From the outside, nothing remarkable, but this pastor had an extraordinary and rare gift for praying in tongues. He could pray in tongues for hours without stopping, without faltering, without losing intensity, like an engine running at full speed without ever overheating. And when this pastor prayed in tongues, the spiritual world round his church literally became hell for all the sorcerers within a wide radius. The white fire of his prayer rose like a mushroom cloud above the building and spread out in a circle, covering a radius I estimated to be several hundred meters in the spirit world, and nothing, absolutely nothing, of what we knew in the darkness, no technique, no ritual, no incantation, no spiritual shield could work within that ray of white fire as long as the pastor prayed in tongues. One of my wealthiest clients, a businessman from the Ajame district who owned several stores, hired me to block a business competitor who was an active member of this church. The competitor was inexplicably thriving, his stores attracted customers like a magnet, his business grew every month, and my client, who had the same products at the same price, saw his customer base steadily dwindle. He was convinced that the source of his competitor's success was not natural, and he wanted to block it. I accepted the mission with confidence, but from my very first attempt to make contact in the spiritual realm, I realized I had a colossal problem. The competitor was an ordinary man, his personal spiritual defenses weren't particularly strong, but he was protected by the prayers in tongues of the Ajayim pastor, and this protection was an impenetrable dome of white fire. I tried for 2 whole months, nightly attempts that all ended in the same humiliating way. I arrived in the spirit world, headed towards my target, and as soon as I entered the pastor's range, the white fire struck me full force and violently pushed me back like a giant hand swatting away an insect. I couldn't even get close enough to launch an attack. I was neutralized before I even began. I finally called my client and told him, with a shame I had never felt in my 16-year career, I can't do anything against your competitor, as long as this Ajam pastor lives and prays in tongues. Your rival is untouchable, he's a shield I can't penetrate. It was an admission of utter powerlessness from a spiritual hunter trained by the wall itself. The fourth and final prayer is the one that shattered my hunting career and brought me to my knees before God, and it is perhaps the most unexpected of the 4. The prayer that terrified witches and wizards was the prayer of marital harmony, when a husband and wife prayed together. And this prayer is perhaps the most unexpected of the 4 for many Christians who don't realize the colossal power of this simple act. I'm not talking about the husband praying alone in the car in the morning on his way to work while the wife prays alone in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the children. Those are 2 separate individual prayers that create 2 separate individual prayer blankets. I'm talking about praying together at the same time, in the same room, side by side or face to face, with the same intention directed toward the same goal. The husband's voice and the wife's voice rising together to heaven like 2 rivers joining to form one. When a married couple prays together in the spirit world, a phenomenon occurs that witches and wizards call spiritual merging. The 2 individual prayer blankets, the husband's and the wife's, cease to be 2 separate entities and merge into one unified blanket, and this merged cover is not simply there. The arithmetic sum of the 2 individual blankets. It's not a +1 equals 2, it's something radically different. It's a +1 equals 1000. The multiplication is exponential, not additive. The merged blanket is hundreds of times more powerful than the 2 individual blankets combined, and this merged blanket possesses a unique and terrifying characteristic for witches and wizards that I call self-healing, a property that witches and wizards fear more than anything else, and one that makes the merged blanket virtually indestructible. Here's how self-healing works in the spirit world. When you attack the prayer blanket of a single person, a celibate, or a spouse praying individually, and you succeed in creating a breach in that blanket, the breach remains open. It remains gaping like a hole in a wall until the person prays again with enough intensity to seal it, and between the moment the breach is created and the moment the person prays again, the sorcerer has all the time in the world to slip through that breach and launch their attack. It's like a security wall with a hole, and the guard is asleep. The thief walks in quietly, but the fused shield of a couple praying together functions radically differently. It's a 2-tiered, interconnected defense system. If the sorcerer attacks the husband's side and, through a superhuman effort, manages to create a tiny breach, the wife's side immediately detects it and sends an automatic reinforcement of light and power to seal it. The breach closes in seconds, not hours, not days.